All right, good afternoon, folks. I'm going to take things nice and slow, let folks get the chance to trickle on in. I know we have a lot of folks registered. I know it's election day. I know people might be running right back into their office. So I'm going to take up a little airtime with some housekeeping announcements. But welcome to our training that we are hosting in honor of Veterans Day coming up this Friday. As always, when we have these trainings that honor a day, I always like to remind everyone a day is not enough. This is just to have the conversation because in support of and in honor of, but I hope that this training helps you not just on Friday and not just on in this awareness, but throughout your journey as veteran advocates. And on that note, this webinar is part of a series that we are developing, a 4-part series that will touch on different aspects of veteran work. So I say that to say that even though this is in honor of Veterans Day this Friday, we will be continuing the education throughout the end of December and then going into the new year, and I'll get you all that information. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Alexis Alvarez. I am the Director of Statewide Training at Florida Legal Services. And I'm here today to welcome you to Advocating for Women Veterans. And I'm very excited to share this space with you and with our presenter. Housekeeping announcements, as always, this is approved for CLE credit. I have one general CLE credit, I believe. I will post that CLE code into the chat and also say it out loud at the end of the presentation. Second piece of housekeeping announcements, this is being recorded. So a copy of this recording will be sent to all of you who are here live and anyone who registered but wasn't able to attend 24 hours after the event. The email will come from Zoom. It will not come from my personal email, but I will provide you my email address just in case it doesn't hit your inbox or you don't see it. So this is being recorded and you will get a copy of that recording. And I think the final piece of housekeeping announcement is questions and answers. Please drop your questions and answers into the chat or the Q&A, whatever you're more comfortable with. We will do our best to monitor both of those platforms in order to answer your questions when time permits. And so without further ado, I will move into introductions of our speaker here today. Today with us, we have Chesley Roberts, who serves as the Senior Program Manager for the Veterans Consortium's Legal Assistance Programs. She began working at TVC in 2020 as an Equal Justice Works Fellow, sponsored by Lockheed Martin Corporation. During her fellowship, Chesley managed TVC's Women's Veterans Legal Assistance Program and focused on the unique legal issues women veterans face. In her current role, Chesley manages the Women's Veterans Legal Assistance Program, where she assists women veterans who are survivors of military sexual trauma with their claims for VA disability compensation. She also manages the Veterans Naturalization Assistance Program, which assists veterans who are applying for U.S. citizenship through their military service. Chesley is a graduate of Florida State University and Stetson University College of Law. While in law school, Chesley worked at Stetson's Veteran Advocacy Clinic in St. Petersburg, Florida. She assisted veterans who were appealing decisions denying VA disability benefits. And I stuttered going over the FSU because I went to FSU and I just went to the FSU UM game and FSU did very well. So it took me all to not say, go Noles. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Chesley. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all of the work that you do for our veteran community. And thank you for ensuring that we have a training this week in honor of Veterans Day to open this conversation and promote the learning around this important subject. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen real quick and then I'm going to get started. But if there's any questions anytime, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. If there's time at the end, I will definitely get to them. And if we don't have time to cover questions, if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me after today's presentation. Okay. So as Alexis said, my name is Chesley. I'm the Senior Program Manager at TVC. And today I'm going to cover best practices for handling VA compensation claims related to military sexual trauma, and explain how you as an advocate can represent survivors through a trauma-informed approach. And I'll also be explaining the importance and need for advocates for women veterans. So I'm just to start off by talking about who we are at TVC. Then we will go into VA disability compensation. I will briefly touch over the requirements for disability compensation. Then I'll get into more details about claims related to military sexual trauma. We'll go through some trauma-informed lawyering best practices, and then we will end on the need for advocating for women veterans.
Not switching.
Not switching right now.
No worries.
Oh,
there you go.
There we go. Okay.
Now it's going to go like 12 slides forward, right? That's just
Probably. So I apologize if that happens. But while we're on this one, I'll go ahead and talk about our mission statement at the Veterans Consortium. So we believe that our veterans, our nation's defenders, deserve the care, benefits, and compensation they were promised, and the best legal services free of charge to meet their challenges. So our main line of service is that we facilitate pro bono representation in federal venues to qualifying veterans, their family, caregivers, and survivors. So we train volunteer attorneys and we place cases with them to represent veterans at the U.S. Court of Appeals for veterans claims. And then we continue further to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit or the Supreme Court if needed. Since our creation 30 years ago, we have expanded a little bit, so we do have a couple of different programs. We also can facilitate pro bono representation for cases on remand from the court back down to the Board of Veterans Appeals. We have a discharge upgrade program where we train volunteer attorneys and facilitate representation for veterans who have experienced traumatic brain injury, PTSD, any other mental health condition. They experienced MST while in service, and they were discharged with less than an honorable discharge due to that. We can help them apply for an upgrade before the discharge review boards and Board for Correction of Military Records. We also have a Women Veterans Legal Assistance Program where we assist women veterans with their claims for conditions related to military sexual trauma. We have our Veterans Naturalization Assistance Program to assist veterans with application for citizenship through the military service. And we also operate 2 pro bono legal advice and referral clinics. And one of our clinics is specifically for women veterans. So we're just going to dive into it now. First thing we're going to talk about is VA disability compensation. So what is disability compensation? So this is a monthly monetary benefit given to veterans because of injuries or diseases that were incurred or aggravated during active military service. And this can apply to both physical and mental health conditions. To be eligible for the compensation, the individual must meet a few requirements. So first, they must meet the VA's definition of a veteran. And then they must establish service connection for their condition. And there are 3 requirements to establish service connection, and I will go through each of these requirements in a little more detail. So for VA purposes, a veteran is defined as a person who served in the active military, naval, or air service, and who was discharged or released therefrom under conditions other than dishonorable. So usually if the veteran has an honorable discharge, they can apply for a disability compensation. If they have a general under honorable conditions, they can apply for a disability compensation. Usually with a general, they're only not eligible for education benefits. And then they have less than a general, they still may be able to apply for disability compensation, but that's going through a character of discharge determination, which can be its own training. So I won't hit into that, but just know that even if they don't have an honorable original, they still may be considered a veteran for VA purposes. So once the individual is determined a veteran by the VA, the first thing they need to do to show service connection is show they have a current disability. So the current disability must be more than an injury. The veteran must be suffering from a disability that is currently affecting their life. This can be a physical or mental illness, and they must present evidence that they are currently affected by this disability and it wasn't a disability that was in service, but then they're no longer being affected by it. This can be done by submitting medical evidence, such as medical records, or a statement from their doctor describing their condition. And a veteran can also submit a statement describing their own symptoms. And in most cases, the VA will schedule the veteran for a medical exam to determine a diagnosis. So then the second requirement is the veteran will need to show there is an in-service event, injury, or disease that could have caused the current disability. What the veteran needs to show to prove this element will depend on the claim. So for example, if they're filing for a claim for post-traumatic stress disorder, the veteran will need to show evidence of the stressor that caused the PTSD. The event or injury also does not need to be related to the veteran's official duties. Someone can get service connection for a knee injury that happened after being ordered to jump out of a helicopter during combat, or someone can get service connection for a knee injury that happened while they were playing a baseball game on the weekend. As long as the injury happened during a period of active service and there is evidence that it showed that it led to the condition the veteran is currently facing. And then the last requirement is the veteran must demonstrate that there is a nexus or a link between the in-service event and their current condition. This is commonly shown through medical evidence, and medical evidence is often the most important part of a claim for disability compensation. In most cases, as I mentioned earlier with the current disability, the VA may schedule a VA medical exam to determine the diagnosis. The VA also will schedule that exam to determine if there's a link between the condition and service event. And most common reason a VA claim may be denied is due to the lack of nexus. So no matter how obvious the link between the veteran's service injury and current disability, may be for us, a lack of medical evidence that clearly defines this connection will and may result in a denial of benefits. And the veteran may testify about their symptoms and testify that their event led to their condition, but the fact that the veteran is not a medical expert may make their testimony not as probative, so the VA may not rely on their own testimony, which just shows the importance of medical evidence. Okay. So now that we briefly hit the requirements for service connection, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail about claims that are for conditions related to military sexual trauma, because they are looked at a little bit differently by the VA. So what is military sexual trauma? The VA defines MST as a psychological trauma which in the judgment of a VA mental health professional resulted from a physical assault of a sexual nature, battery of a sexual nature, or a sexual harassment which occurred while the veteran was serving on active duty. So as you can tell, MST has a broad definition, and it can include being pressured or coerced into sexual activities, someone having sexual contact with someone else without their consent, or if they were unable to consent, being physically forced to have sex, being touched in a way that made them feel uncomfortable, repeated comments about the body, threatening or unwanted sexual advances. It can also include stalking and domestic violence and battery. So the identity and the characteristics of the perpetrator doesn't matter, and whether the service member was on or off duty at the time or on or off base at the time doesn't matter. As long as the veteran was in a period of active duty service, it's considered to be MST for VA purposes. So sexual assault continues to be a pretty serious problem in the military. It's reported about every 30 minutes a service member is assaulted. 1 in 3 women have reported to the VA that they experience MST, but it's estimated that probably almost 1 in 2 women have actually experienced MST while they were serving. And also 4% of males have reported MST to the VA. In 2014, they found about 28 sexual assaults happen each day. In 2018, they reported about 13,000 women experience MST. And then they also have shown or have reported that about 3/4 of survivors do not report the crime. And there could be a variety of reasons why someone did not report. And one of those reasons it could be because of fear. In about 24% of cases where a female service member was assaulted, it was reported that the attacker was someone in their chain of command. So by percentage, women are at greater risk for MST, but anyone can experience MST, and that includes male service members as well. And about 40% of men who have experienced, 40% of people who have reported experiencing MST to the VA end up being men. So while PTSD can also be a frequent result of the MST, survivors also may experience depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. MST can also be associated with physical health conditions and not just mental health conditions. And all survivors may not remember their details of the assault. In fact, memory loss is a common symptom of PTSD, or the veteran may have blocked out that part of their memory in order to protect themselves. So about 75% of assaults go unreported. So they may also have not received treatment for their assault. And that's because a lot of times reporting and treatment are tied together. And then lastly, since the term MST is a broad definition, MST does not necessarily mean rape. So many survivors may not even know they did experience MST while they were in service because they may think just because they were not raped that they did not fall under that definition. So these are a lot of myths and misconceptions about what MST is. But if you can understand and recognize these common myths and misconceptions, you'll be able to understand your client's needs better, and you'll be able to improve your engagement with them. So because MST isn't the diagnosis or condition, but instead an experience, there's no common symptoms of MST. And veterans can differ in their reactions to MST due to their gender, race, religion, culture, etc. For some veterans, the experience of MST may continue to affect their mental and physical health in significant ways. And the onset of these reactions may not be immediate, and it's not uncommon for problems to materialize weeks, months, or even years after a traumatic event. And as we just kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, although PTSD is commonly associated with MST, it's not the only diagnosis that can result from an MST. The diagnosis most frequently associated along with PTSD are depression, other mood disorders, substance use disorders as well. So, excuse me. So how do you obtain service connection for MST-related conditions? So before getting into the details about what is needed to prevail on a claim, I think it's important to know that historically for claims for PTSD based on MST have been disproportionately denied. So in 2013, there was a lawsuit by ACLU and the Service Women Action Network, which highlighted the fact that there was a 10% difference between the denial rates of PTSD claims for men and women. And then in 2018, VA's Office of Inspector General found that there were still many problems with processing of PTSD claims based on MST. The report made recommendations, including making improvements to oversight and improving the training that the raters go through on processing MST-related claims. But however, in 2021, VA's Office of Inspector General once again found that these problems were still persisting in the processing of MST-related claims. Specifically, they found that that the VA was not following the recommendations from the 2018 report. So as we just mentioned, MST is an experience and not the diagnosis or the condition. So filing for MST will not lead in a grant of service connection. Instead, that the veteran has to file for the condition that's related to the MST. So most commonly PTSD. And then just as filing for any service connection claim, the veteran will still have to show the 3 requirements. So the current physical mental health condition, the in-service event, so showing the stressor, the MST, and then the link between the two. For most survivors of MST, it's unlikely that they probably reported the assault. So that's where it can be hard to prove a claim or a condition that is a result of MST, because there's often not proof of the assault. And then also if the veteran experienced any trauma pre or post service, this can also cause some issue when trying to prove the link between the MST and then the current condition. So if they didn't report and there's no proof in their service records of the MST, how do you corroborate that it happened? So the VA does not require the veteran service records to have proof of the assault, and the VA does not require the veteran to have reported the assault in the first place. And the VA may not rely on the absence of a report, the absence of in-service treatment records to show the MST as evidence that the assault did not occur. So when the VA is reviewing claims based on MST, they look for several types of evidence. And they can look outside the service treatment records as well to show that the MST occurred. So as I just mentioned, many survivors do not report. So there's probably not going to be any records in their service treatment records. But while looking through the records, you may be able to find evidence that can corroborate the occurrence of MST. So you want to look for things such as pregnancies or a termination of pregnancy, any tests, trips to the gynecologist, mental health related visits, even if the veteran did not specifically say in that visit that they're here due to an MST, or if they have requested for a duty transfer, requested to be discharged from the military altogether, or if they have reported any other issues with any other service members or any references to bullying. So as you can see on the screen, there's an example of a medical record. And in this one, it makes references to a vaginal infection and potentially rape. So these can be used to show that although the veteran did not report, that there is evidence that may corroborate the stressor. So the VA will also look for markers. And the term marker means an indication of the effect or consequence of the personal trauma on the veteran. So a marker could be one or more behavioral events or a pattern of changed behavior. And even if there is no reference to the personal trauma, evidence that behavior changed may support the possibility of the stressor. So this can be any behavioral event, pattern of changed behavior, or circumstances that could provide clues. So you want to look for things such as increased use or abuse of leave without them giving a reason, any episodes of any mental health symptoms, depression, panic attacks, anxiety, they changed in their work performance. And markers don't only have to be a negative change. If they work performance started to increase, this could be due to maybe the veteran wanted to forget what happened, so they really threw themselves into work to try to keep their mind occupied. So positive changes can also be a marker. You can also look for any relationship issues or any treatment for physical injuries around the time of the claimed trauma, but maybe it wasn't reported as a result of the trauma. So a personal statement can be one of the most important pieces of evidence to add to the claim. The personal statement is a great way to give context for the markers. And it also gives you the chance to humanize your client and show the VA who they are. So if it is a PTSD claim, and especially if it's PTSD claim based on MST, the VA does require the veteran to submit a personal statement. The VA will send the form 0781A, but make sure you don't limit yourself to this form. The form gives a very small box for the veteran to explain everything and not be able to tell their whole story in the space provided. So the best thing to do is fill out that form, but write "see attached" on it, and then attach the veteran's signed personal statement along with it. Before writing the statement with your client, make sure to review the record and create your own timeline. So you can help, because that will help you determine what information is needed from the client. Because the veteran's story may change, and this is not because they're lying, they just may have forgotten details, or they may have blocked out details in an attempt to protect themselves. And they also may not just have wanted to talk about it before, so they may not have told the whole story. Inconsistent reporting can be seen by the VA as evidence of lack of credibility. So if you are seeing your client's story change throughout their claims process, just make sure to advocate around this point. And then one thing definitely to remember is writing the statement can be very re-traumatizing and triggering for the veteran. So you're going to want to approach writing and interviewing the client for their statement in a certain way. And we'll be able to talk about interviewing techniques in a few minutes. So this is just a template that I use with my clients when writing a personal statement. I start off with asking the veteran to tell me a little bit about themselves before they join the service. I find this very helpful to show the VA how they have changed due to their experience and to show really the impact of how their symptoms stay are affecting them. Then you'll want to write the details about the MST. You want to try to get the veteran to give you as many details as possible. A lot of claims are denied due to the lack of detail. But if they cannot remember everything, that is okay. They don't need to know the very specific details, such as the name of the perpetrator, or they don't need to know the exact date. But if they can give as much details as possible, that just gives their claim a better chance to be granted. And then after that, you'll need the veteran to write about how they changed because of the MST. This is a perfect time to mention those markers. So during this time, they can talk about maybe their work performance decreased or increased, if they start having relationship issues with their partner they had at the time, or maybe they stopped talking to their friends and family, anything like that that can show their behavior change. And then lastly, you'll want to have the veteran talk about their symptoms that they are currently experiencing, any treatment they're going through. And this will be helpful for the rating if they end up getting service connected. I also find a well-written personal statement can be very helpful for the veteran during medical exams. So I tell my clients to bring a copy of their personal statement with them. So when the examiner is asking them about the MST event or about the symptoms they're experiencing today, the veterans can look at their statement to make sure they're telling the examiner the full story. The exam can be very stressful for them, and they may not remember to say everything during the exam, but if they have the statement with them, then we can make sure that they're giving the examiner the full picture. So the type of evidence you're going to need is really determined on a case-by-case basis, but here are a few other examples of evidence that may be important to add. So buddy statements, anyone that the veteran is still in contact with that they served with, that can be helpful to corroborate the stressor, especially if they knew about the assault at the time it happened. Friends and family statements can be helpful to show the change in behavior. So if you can have the family write a statement about how the veteran was and how their behavior was before they joined the service, but then when they came home, they were a completely different person and trying to talk to their symptoms they were experiencing. If the veteran has a doctor that is willing to write a nexus letter that shows the link between the two, between the condition and event, I definitely suggest adding that to the claim. It's helpful to show if there is a long gap in time between treatment and service. It's helpful for any secondary conditions. I also find having a nexus letter is also very helpful if you're trying to fight against negative evidence. So the veteran already went through the VA medical exam and it was unfavorable. If you can have a nexus letter from the veteran's doctor to show that they do have this condition and it is related to their service, it's helpful to fight against the negative evidence. And then lastly, if there's any medical literature that can be helpful to establish the connection, especially between primary and secondary conditions. But it can also be helpful to show that the veteran's symptoms are a result of their PTSD, or if the way their behavior change may be a very common reaction to someone that experienced a trauma. So after going through the process, if the claim is denied, the first step is to determine what issue did the VA have with the claim. So did the VA say there was no link between the condition and service event, or were they saying there was no in-service event and saying it's because there wasn't enough evidence showing that the event occurred? So whatever the issue the VA had is, you'll need to address that head on and address any negative evidence head on. So one of the best ways to do that is by looking at the common errors that are made by the VA and then addressing that straightforward. So one common error could be evidence gathering issues. So the VA must make reasonable efforts to assist a claimant in obtaining any evidence necessary to substantiate their claim. And this can be obtaining their service records, VA medical records, and private medical records. The second error is the VA not requesting a medical exam. So the VA does have a duty to assist, which may include providing a medical exam when there is evidence on file that shows a current disability that may be a result of an in-service event, and there is insufficient evidence to make a decision on the records that are in the file. The third error is a claim was decided based on insufficient medical opinion. The medical opinion must sufficiently inform the reader of the examiner's judgment and provide a rationale for their opinion and be based on all medical history. So if the medical opinion did not do all of that, then that is an error and you can appeal on that basis and try to get a new medical exam. I would also add that a common error for PTSD claims based on MST is that the VA may overlook markers. So in my experience, the VA overlooks the less obvious markers, such as maybe a small decrease in work performance, or they may have only gone to mental health treatment once or twice instead of a continuing treatment. But making sure that the VA does recognize all their markers does show that there may be a stressor as well. So these are just some misconceptions that your client may come to you about VA disability compensation. And if you can recognize that a lot of veterans may experience and think about these misconceptions, then you'll be able to represent them better. So I'm not going to go through each one of them because we've kind of already talked about all of them. But just to hit on a few points, that the veteran is not required to have reported the assault while in service. They're not required to have gotten treatment in service. And there's not a certain time period or a certain period of years they've had undergone treatment in order to file. And MST is a very broad definition, so it includes more than just being raped. And even if they consented under pressure, being coerced is still considered MST as well. So it can be difficult to obtain benefits for MST. And probably the main reason is because there is often not reporting, so it may be hard to prove that the MST incurred. But many veterans may feel traumatized all over again when going through this process, from starting with writing their personal statement to having to go see a VA medical examiner and explain everything to them again. And then it may end with the VA telling them that they don't get service connection because they didn't show enough evidence. So they may feel like no one's believing their story. So trauma-informed lawyering places your client's trauma at the forefront of how you engage with your client. This requires you to adjust your typical practice approach so you're informed by your client's trauma experiences and individual reactions to those experiences. It also focuses on minimizing their re-traumatization as much as possible in order to make sure that you're able to effectively communicate with your client. So trauma refers to experience that may have caused intense physical and or psychological stress reactions. And the experience could be a single event, multiple events, and or a set of circumstances. So I took this picture from another presentation that I attended, but I really liked what it represented. So this is a scan of the brain, and on the left side, you'll see that's a scan of a healthy brain. And on the right side, you'll see it's a scan of an abused brain. And it shows that we have physical changes to our brain when we experience trauma. So traumatic memories, unlike other memories, are not stored in our thinking part of the brain. They are stored in the part of the brain that's responsible for nonverbal emotion. So this means it may be difficult for survivors to recall traumatic events in an organized manner. Instead, most survivors may recall their reactions to the traumatic event in other ways, such as through images or sensation, or heightened through their emotions. So when the case requires you to talk about the trauma and having details about the trauma, this can create challenges for you and your client. So trauma can affect everyone differently. You may have a client that is going to avoid the talking about it and avoid the situation. They may not answer the calls, they may miss appointments. You may have a client that has difficulty focusing on tasks, or someone that has a fractured memory, so they may forget to complete the task or follow up with you or do other things that you may need them to do. But if you can understand why your clients are reacting in a certain way and tailor your approach to fit their needs, it will help the engagement with your client. So now I'm going to go through some tips and best practices for when working with trauma survivors, and then specifically hitting on tips for interviewing your client when it's time to talk about the trauma. So my first tip is do not ask the client to talk about their trauma or retell their story during the first meeting. It's critical to build trust with your client, and that will take more than one meeting. So in the first meeting, and just go over the process, answer any basic questions they may have. Make sure to explain the role and responsibilities for everyone involved. Set your expectations in the first meeting, but also empower your client by making the meeting collaborative, by asking the client what their goals are, what they would like to see, what would happen in the end, and discuss together how you will achieve those goals. So really just take the first meeting as a time to get to know your client, but also complete the simple tasks such as going through an engagement agreement, figuring out what records you will need, and etc. So here are just some other tips when working with a client who's a trauma survivor. So make sure you want to create a structure. So let them know what to expect. When I set up a meeting with my clients, I always let them know what to expect that meeting, about what we're going to talk about, how long it should last. I find that this helps them calm down, so they won't always go into a meeting thinking this is the day that she's going to ask me to retell my trauma. Also want to establish roles, determine your client's expectations, and then be honest and realistic with them about how you can help and if you can meet those goals. Identify other players. So if the client needs help, who's going to help them obtain a document, who can help support them while they're going through this process. If you can, who else should you contact to either get medical records or buddy statements, anything like that. Then lastly, set boundaries. So it's okay to say no to your clients, even for simple things, and make sure they know when to contact you or how to contact you. But make sure they know that you only work for a certain period of time, that you can only be contacted through to these hours. Okay, so when it is time to discuss the trauma, you always want to approach any potential conversations that may trigger your client very gently. So before approaching a sensitive topic, give a warning to them about where you're about to go and explain to them why you're going there and why you're about to ask the questions that you are. Allow the client to tell their story in a way that they experience or recall it. Clients may avoid themes or topics that cause them to re-experience the trauma. And it's not because they're being uncooperative, it's just their defense mechanism most of the time. Resist the urge to interrupt your client's narrative. If you need to ask a question, instead write down your questions, record your questions, and at the end of the client telling their story, come back and go through those questions with them in order for you to get the details that you need. And then while you're interviewing your client, check in with them. Monitor the reactions and take breaks when they appear overwhelmed, or if they need, or make sure you ask them if they need to take a break here and there, because they may not even let you know that they need to. But also make sure you monitor your own reactions as well. If you're comfortable with asking the questions, it's more likely that the veteran's going to be comfortable in answering your questions. And this is one of the hardest things for me, but be comfortable with the silence. So most of the time, if there is a silent moment, it could be because your client's trying to remember something to answer the question you may just ask, or they may just need a moment before continuing. And yeah, they may just need a moment before continuing. And then lastly, always let them know that they don't have to remember everything in this one meeting, this one sitting. Let them know that your door is always open for them to come back and let them and tell you that they remembered something else that happened. So the question style can vary based on what information you're needing. Asking yes and no questions can be helpful when you're trying to get a very specific, concrete detail from the client. But open-ended questions can be helpful when you're trying to get a better understanding about your client's situation and or their desires. Circle back on questions when you can. This shows the veteran that you're listening to them, but it's also helpful when you're trying to get more details about something the veteran may have just said. So an example of circling back can be, understand you recently left the military. You mentioned something about your supervisor sending you an email. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? The physical environment and format of the interview can contribute significantly to the client's stress or comfort. So when possible, provide options so you can learn about what will make the veteran most comfortable. Especially in today's age, I usually ask my clients, do they prefer to talk over a phone call, or do they want me to send them a Zoom link? Then I also ask them if they want to draft a personal statement first and let me read that, and then I'll follow up with any questions, or if we just want to do the typical interview and then I complete the draft for them. When you're asking questions, you want to make sure you're asking them to learn. A good example of this is asking them why they did not report the assault. So if you just ask, why did you not report? This may sound like you're disproving their actions, but when you start off by letting them know that it's okay that they didn't report, that it's not necessary, but you want to know why they didn't, you may get a better answer and a better understanding of why they did not. Then lastly, through the whole process of the interview and just through the whole process of working with a trauma survivor, you want to make sure that you convey support and belief. So you may be the first person the veteran has ever talked to about their experience. And so a supportive response really has the power to be very healing for them. So this work can be very tough, not only for our clients, but also for us as advocates. So sometimes our clients' experiences can trigger our experiences if we have experienced something similar to them, or even if we haven't experienced something similar, we may be able to understand and be empathetic about what they're going through, so it still may trigger us. So make sure you take some time for yourself when working with these types of cases and working with your clients. And make sure to monitor your reactions, because your symptoms may start to mirror your clients. So it is important to understand that women veterans may face unique issues and unique challenges. And us as advocates may need to work with and advocate for women veterans in a different way than when we compare them to the male counterparts or non-veteran women. So research has suggested that between 81 to 90% of female veterans may have been exposed to some type of trauma during their military service, which is significantly higher than the civilian population. About 40% of women veterans have experienced MST, but I believe that a lot of people think that number is higher because that's just based on people who have reported. But also female veterans have a greater risk of becoming homeless. They have a greater risk of experiencing and developing PTSD and other mental health conditions, and have a greater chance of living in poverty. But this does not mean all women veterans are going to have experienced trauma or have a condition or have the same reaction as someone who has experienced trauma. But some barriers for women veterans as they are going through the process, or some barriers as they're trying to transition back to civilian life, may be barriers of care, especially with male-dominated systems such as the VA Medical Center or any veteran organization. It's usually male-dominated just because of the numbers in the military, that there are more male veterans than female veterans. There also may be barriers to talk about their experiences. So they may have some shame or self-blame for what they experienced. They don't want to talk about it. There is stigma associated with sexual trauma, or they may have a fear of showing weakness or feel like they're not being supported. Also, women veterans are less likely to self-identify as veterans, and this can result in them choosing not to seek out VA services or benefits or engaging in any veterans groups that do offer that much needed support and resources that they do need. And the reason they don't self-identify could be due to not being treated as an equal during their service, being a victim of harassment and sexual assault, or they just don't want to explain or justify their experience as a veteran because some people may just think differently. And so the population of women in the veteran community is growing more rapidly than the systems we have in place to support them. And this has created an environment where women's service to the nation is less recognized, maybe less respected by some, and maybe less valued when compared to their male counterparts. So in conclusion, women veterans are entitled to the same benefits and service as male veterans, but they do face unique challenges when it comes to accessing what they are entitled to, in large part due to the lack of support systems within the VA and the veteran services community. But if we can help create the spaces where women veterans feel comfortable and do want to seek out the resources that they need and are entitled to, and be able to work with them through the trauma-informed approach, then hopefully we'll be able to have these barriers that when veterans face start to decrease a little bit more. So that's it for me. I thank you all again for joining us today. I'm not sure if you have any questions, but I'm happy to answer any if anyone has any.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chesley. And I actually jotted down a few questions I was going to ask. I don't see anything that came into the chat or the Q&A. So folks, feel free to drop any last minute questions that you have. We have until 1 o'clock, but of course we can always end early so folks can enjoy their lunch. Just to let everybody know, this training was approved by the Florida Bar for 1 general CLE credit. That CLE code is 2208988N as in Nancy. I did drop that into the chat. That code will also be included in an email that you will receive from Zoom in 24 hours with a copy of this recording, I believe a copy of the PowerPoint as well in PDF form, and obviously that CLE code. So, a lot of what you said everything you said, certainly resonated with me. One thing I did want to point out is comfiness in silence. I'm right there with you. It's one of the most difficult things, I think, for all of us as lawyers. And then, I also, I only practiced veterans law very briefly in my career, but I was a public defender for 5 years, before I moved into this field. And I feel so often I would interview my clients with exactly like what you said, to disprove rather than to learn. And I think that's really, really an important mantra for everyone to hold on to, including myself. Listen to learn, not to disprove. I really, really liked that.
Definitely.
So just some quick questions that I had. Hopefully they're helpful to others. If not, I apologize. Again, I'm not super versed in this field. But you mentioned at one point that the VA has a duty to put on a medical exam depending on the sufficiency of the evidence. And you said that evidence sufficient to request a medical exam. And I was thinking, what are some examples of that? So if someone's like perusing through the medical records and they're like, you know what, this is not sufficient. So I didn't know if you had any examples that you've encountered in your career.
Yeah. So one case actually comes to mind because I was actually just arguing this point. The veteran had the diagnosis of PTSD. He admitted in a few different medical visits that he experienced an assault, but didn't go into details about it. He just wasn't ready to talk about it at the time, really. So even though he admitted that there was that in-service event, the VA didn't give him a medical exam because they said, oh, there is no evidence to show an event happened, so we don't have the duty to provide this with him. So it can just be a little, it doesn't have to be all the evidence. You don't have to show it exactly happened for the VA's duty to assist or duty to assist or trigger. But just mentioning somewhere in the records that this in-service event causes PTSD triggers that duty.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking, for example, a veteran who never reported, right? That might be an example too, because the medical records will be silent as to any sort of, medical evaluation of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And then the second thing I was thinking of as you're talking, and I come from a litigation background, so I'm always thinking in the litigation context. And I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned it or I might have just come up myself, but, witnesses, character witnesses, whether it be character or obviously, I think it's probably a lot harder to find witnesses that actually witnessed the event. I'm sure it does happen. But I'm thinking, my question was kind of, have you ever used, character witnesses or any types of witnesses, and how that helps, what hurts, what your opinion is on that, when they're helpful and how to use them?
Yeah. First off the bat, buddy statements always helpful. If I can get a buddy statement from someone, it's going in the application. It can be a buddy statement from someone that served with the veteran that maybe the veteran did tell that this happened to me, and it would just be a statement to corroborate the stressor. Or it can be someone that doesn't know the event happened, but they can talk about how the veteran came back from their service and they started experiencing anxiety and depression. So if there's anyone that the veteran knows that can talk to the event or just talk about their change in behaviors, it's very important to grab that evidence and add. All it does is just support the veteran's credibility a little bit more and to support the claim that something did occur.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense to me. Those are the questions that came to my mind as I was listening to the presentation. The rest of the stuff that came to my mind was just, a lot of thanks and really appreciation for those reminders of how to go about things in a trauma-informed way and really out of respect. It's so tough, and I'm sure we're overwhelmed with cases. We want to get to a result, and we're analytical thinkers as lawyers. And so we tend to easily forget how important those tools are. And maybe if we reframed in our minds, and I'm sorry if everyone else does this, but not me, so I'm talking to myself, but reframing in, it's not just to make the veteran or the client feel better. It actually is proven to be a better way for you to get the information you need, right? Maybe then
Definitely.
lawyers like me who are always thinking at the next step, will slow down and really try to do it the way that the survivor needs it.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. If you can build that foundation of trust with them, you'll get the information a lot more easier from them and get more details in order just to make your case and your claim even stronger.
absolutely. And so before we close out, something I did want to mention too is I kind of mentioned it earlier, folks, but so we are developing a veteran focused training series. And our goal is to have a training. We had kicking off with this one, then having a second training in December, a third in January, and a fourth in February. We're still in the process of developing everything and getting our speakers together and putting the titles together and all of that. But I wanted to put into the chat the registration for the next training that we are going to be having. As of right now, the date is the 13th of December. If that changes, you'll automatically get notification by registering. So, it's helpful for you just to register if you want to be there. And that topic will be focused on CAVC VA benefits training. And I put in there that it's statewide because our reach is statewide to all legal aid organizations in Florida and beyond. So I hope to see you all at that next training event. You will definitely get emails from me reminding you anyway. But it would be really great if you all can stick with us. And thank you for coming to our kickoff event. Thank you for honoring this week and this day on Friday of awareness. And with that being said, Chesley, do you have any last minute things that you want to say? I know you've done plenty of talking today.
No, I think we're good. Just thank you everyone for joining with us today and just kicking off this great series. Speaking because it's my organization, there'll be some great presentations coming up, so you're definitely going to miss them.
Without a doubt. I'm really looking forward to it. And thank you very much for everything that you do and for being with us in community today and teaching us about this important subject.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.